The Secret of the Woman Who Kept Everything Inside. Why Her Dreams Had No Way Out. Jung. There are things only those who've held it all inside can understand. Like smiling with your mouth but screaming with your body. Like waking up exhausted even after 8 hours of sleep. Like feeling that everyone loves you, except you. If any of these statements just touched your heart, if something inside you stirred right now, stick around, because this story might be yours too. Maybe you're also that woman who learned to silence everything. Before I go on, let me tell you something. You are not alone. In fact, you never were. You never. There's a multitude of silent women walking around out there, carrying the whole world on their shoulders and forgetting they also have the right to be carried. This is the story of a woman who discovered her dreams had no way out until she realized the exit had been inside her all along. And if you're here watching this, it's probably because some part of you is looking for that door too. You know that feeling of living a life that isn't yours. Waking up every day and feeling like you're playing a role someone else wrote for you. Looking in the mirror and not fully recognizing the woman staring back at you. I knew that woman intimately. I lived in her skin for 42 years. And if you're watching me now, maybe you know her too. Maybe she lives inside you as well. Because there's a silent epidemic happening. An epidemic of women who learn to be so good at taking care of everyone else that they forgot how to take care of themselves. Women who are so efficient at solving everyone else's problems that they never have time to look at their own. Women who smile so much for the world that they've forgotten what their own face looks like when no one's watching. I was that woman who always got everything done. You know her, right? The one who always knew where the important papers were, everyone's medications, the dates of birthdays nobody else remembered. The one who got out of bed even with pain in her back, in her legs, in her soul, because no one else would do it for me. Or I was the woman who said, "I'm fine," even when everything inside me was screaming, "No, I'm not." The one who smiled at family gatherings even when she wanted to cry. The one who put up with sexist jokes at work because it wasn't a big deal. The one who had sex without really wanting to because it was my duty. I was the woman who came home from work dead tired and still made dinner, still helped with homework, still listened to everyone else's problems. The one who went to bed last and got up first. The one who never complained, never asked for help, never said she couldn't take it anymore. I became so necessary to everyone else that I became unnecessary to myself. And you know what's the most painful part? Nobody noticed. Nobody saw that behind that strong, efficient woman who never complained. There was a frightened little girl asking for comfort, an exhausted woman asking to rest, a soul asking to be truly seen. If you recognize this woman, if she lives inside you, leave a like right now. It's just a small gesture, but in this space, even the smallest action is noticed. It matters. It's valid. Because here's the truth. From an early age, we learn that a good woman is a quiet woman. A good woman doesn't complain, doesn't bother anyone, doesn't cause trouble. A good woman solves everything on her own and still smiles at the end. And I was a very good woman until I couldn't be anymore. I remember the first time I realized something was wrong. I was in the shower on some random Sunday, and suddenly I started to cry. I didn't know why. Nothing specific had happened, but the tears came as if they'd been stored up for years. And they had. They'd been stored up for years. Tears of exhaustion that I never let out. Tears of anger that I never allowed myself to feel. tears of sadness that I'd always swallowed so I wouldn't bother anyone. In that moment, under the hot water, I understood that there was a woman inside me who was thirsty, desperate to be seen, and I was the only person who could save her. Every time someone raised their voice at me, I shrank, not physically, you understand, but inside. I shrank so I wouldn't disrupt anything, so I wouldn't bother anyone, so I wouldn't cause more trouble than I already imagined I did. I learned early, very early, that people who stay silent survive. When my father yelled at my mother, I ran to my room and covered my ears with a pillow. When my mother cried afterward, I pretended to be asleep. I learned that other people's pain wasn't my responsibility, but I also learned that my own pain wasn't anyone else's responsibility either. And so I grew up, silencing my exhaustion when I got home from work, dead tired, and still had to make dinner. Silencing my anger when he came home late without telling me. Silencing my desire to shout, "I have dreams too," whenever everyone talked about their plans and nobody asked about mine. Silencing, always silencing. At school, I was the neat little girl who never caused trouble. At work, I was the employee who always said yes to overtime. At home, I was the wife who never complained about dishes left in the sink. In the family, I was the daughter who always called, who always remembered birthdays, who was always available. I became an expert at reading other people's emotions before they even knew how they felt. I knew when my husband was stressed just by the way he opened the door. I knew when my kids were sad just by the way they breathed. I knew when my mum was worried just by the tone of her voice on the phone. But I had no idea what I was feeling, because in order to read others, I had to be silent, to always be there for everyone. I had to be unavailable to myself, to be the woman everyone needed. I had to stop being the woman I actually was. And the scariest part is that it happens so gradually, you don't even notice. One day, you're playing with dolls and dreaming of becoming an astronaut. The next, you're cleaning the house and dreaming of just one free afternoon. One day you have an opinion about everything. The next, you agree with everyone to avoid conflict. One day you know exactly who you are. The next, you only know who you are in relation to other people. Comment down below if you too learned to keep quiet. If you were that girl who learned her feelings were bothersome. Sometimes, writing is like opening a small crack in the wall we've built around our hearts. And don't be afraid to write. This is a safe space. We don't judge here. We welcome you. I need to tell you something. This cycle of pain is not your fault. You didn't consciously choose to live like this. You were conditioned from a young age to believe that your worth as a woman was directly tied to how much you could please others. And this is not just an individual issue. It's cultural, historical, generational. Our mothers were taught to be quiet. Our grandmothers were taught to be quiet. And without even realizing it, they taught us the same thing. Not out of malice, but because it was the only way they knew how to survive in a world that had no room for women's voices. But here's the good news. You can break that cycle. You can be the first woman in your lineage to figure out who you really are once you stop trying to be who everyone else wants you to be. There was a day, just a regular day, nothing special. The phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was my sister, wanting to vent about her marriage like she always did, like she had for years. And for the first time in my life, I let it ring. I didn't pick it up. I just lay there in bed, listening to that insistent ring, and a voice inside me said, "Not today." For a few seconds, I let myself be unavailable. I let myself exist just for me. It might sound small, even silly. But for a woman who lived her entire life for others, who was always the first to answer, to help, to solve, that moment was revolutionary. That was when it clicked. I had never chosen myself before, not once. In 42 years, I'd never put my own needs first, not a single time. And you know what happened when I didn't pick up? The world didn't end. My sister called back later, resolved her own problems, and life went on. But something inside me had awakened, a voice that had been asleep for decades. That morning, after the phone stopped ringing, I stayed in bed for another hour, doing nothing, not thinking about anything I had to do, just existing, just being. And it felt strange, because I'd forgotten how it felt to simply be, without producing, without solving, without being available, just being. In that moment, I remembered a version of myself I had buried long ago, the little girl who spent hours looking at the clouds, the teenager who wrote poems in her diary, the young woman who dreamed of traveling the world. Where had she gone? When did I lose her? How did I become a woman who only existed for other people? If you're watching this and feeling the same way, if you're also one of those women who live for others, I want you to know, you have the right to exist for yourself. You have the right to say no. You have the right not to be available all the time. You have the right to choose yourself. And that doesn't make you selfish. It makes you human. In the following week, I started doing small experiments. I spent 5 more minutes in the shower. I bought a chocolate just because I wanted one. I read a few pages of a book before bed instead of folding laundry. Little things, tiny gestures, but each one was an act of rebellion against the woman I had become to please everyone else. And with every small act of choosing myself, I felt a different energy coursing through my body, like I was waking up from a very long sleep. That week, I had a dream. It wasn't an ordinary dream. It was one of those dreams that feel more real than reality itself. You know, the kind that clings to your skin when you wake up. I was in a house. I knew it was my house in the dream, but it was a house I had never actually seen before. It was completely empty. No furniture, no life, just white walls, and a silence that made my chest ache. I walked through the halls trying to open a window. Any window. I needed air, needed to see the sky, needed a way out, but all the windows were locked. Every single one, as if someone had locked them on purpose from the inside. In the dream, I felt desperate, running from room to room, pushing windows, pulling latches, but nothing would budge. It was like the entire house was a prison built just for me. And suddenly, in the middle of that despair, I heard a voice, a woman's voice, deep and ancient. She whispered right in my ear, "There's no way out on the outside, only on the inside." I woke up with my heart pounding so hard, it felt like it would jump out of my chest. I was sweating, trembling, and for the first time, I understood what my body had been trying to tell me for years. According to Jung, dreams are the language of the unconscious, the way our psyche communicates truths our conscious mind can't or won't accept. And that dream was my soul screaming what my mouth could never say. The empty house was me, my life, who I had become, a place that looked fine on the outside but was empty on the inside. The locked windows were all the opportunities I never had the courage to pursue, all the dreams I kept locked up inside me. And the voice was my inner wisdom, my feminine intuition trying to tell me that the freedom I was seeking out there could only be found within me. That day, I started paying attention to my dreams. I began writing them down in a notebook by my bed, and I discovered a whole symbolic world that had been trying to speak to me for years. Dreams about birds in cages, dreams about locked doors, dreams where I was always running after someone, dreams where I lost my voice and couldn't scream for help. My unconscious had been warning me for a long time about the prison I had built for myself, about the woman I was betraying every day by being who everyone else wanted me to be. If you've ever had a dream like that, a dream that felt more real than your day-to-day life, leave a comment here. Share it with us. Sometimes sharing these symbols is the first way to give them power. Jung used to say something beautiful. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And I was living the fate of a woman who had never truly known herself. But the dream also brought hope. If the way out was inside, that meant I had the power to free myself. It didn't depend on anyone else changing. It didn't depend on external circumstances. It depended only on me, on having the courage to look inward, to stop looking outside for what only I could give myself. That was when I understood. It wasn't about my husband. It wasn't about my mother, who was always pressuring me. It wasn't about my sister, who only called when she needed something. It wasn't about my kids, who took me for granted. It was about the woman I had become in order not to be abandoned. Jung spoke of the persona, this mask we wear to be accepted by society, and I had created a persona so perfect, so efficient, that even I believed that was the real me. The efficient woman, the polite woman, the resilient woman, the woman who never complains, the woman who always finds a way, the strong woman. But behind that mask was a frightened little girl who just wanted a hug, an exhausted woman who just wanted to rest, a sensitive soul who just wanted to be seen and loved for who she really was, not for what she could do for others. I built myself on top of an old wound and called it strength. And you know what that wound was? The wound of abandonment, the fear of being left behind, the terror of not being enough. So I became indispensable, so useful, so needed that nobody would leave me. But in the process, I abandoned myself first. Because Jung also said, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. And I had built my entire life on the neurosis of being indispensable, so I wouldn't feel the legitimate pain of thinking I was unlovable as I truly was. I had become a woman with no way out, because I'd built my entire identity around other people. My dreams had no escape because they weren't really my dreams. They were other people's expectations of me turned into dreams I assumed were mine. I remember at that time I started asking a question that changed everything. What do I want? Sounds simple, right? But for a woman who spent 40 years asking, what do other people need from me? That question was revolutionary. At first, I didn't know how to answer. It had been so long since I'd asked myself that question that I had completely forgotten what I actually wanted. So I started small. What do I want for dinner? What do I want to do on Sunday? Which movie do I actually want to watch? And slowly, very slowly, I began rediscovering who I was beneath all the layers of expectations and obligations I'd placed on myself. I discovered I liked loud music. I discovered I hated social gatherings where I had to pretend I was okay. I discovered I loved reading philosophy books. I discovered I wanted to learn how to dance. Simple things, basic preferences. But for a woman who'd forgotten she had the right to have preferences, each discovery felt like finding a lost treasure. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, if you're also one of those women who live their lives for others, I need you to know you're not responsible for saving anybody. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to have value. You are already enough. You always have been. The thing is, nobody told you that. Nobody said you had the right to exist for yourself, not just for others. But now you know. And knowing is the first step toward freedom. Jung said, the shadow is the part of ourselves we deny, hide, consider unacceptable. And for 42 years, I kept my shadow locked in the basement of my psyche. My anger, my rebellion, my urge to tell everyone to go to hell and run away, my need to be taken care of, my vulnerability, my selfish desires, my sexuality, my wild creativity. I'd buried all of that in order to be the nice woman everyone approved of. But the shadow doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. It shows up in other ways, in physical illnesses, in disturbing dreams, in silent depression, in sudden outbursts of rage, in a constant sense of emptiness. The first time I allowed myself to really feel anger, it was terrifying. I was washing the dishes after dinner, like always, and my husband came in to talk about his work problems, like always. And suddenly, something inside me exploded. I stopped scrubbing the plate and shouted, "I don't want to hear this right now." The silence afterward was deafening. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I was shocked by the strength of my own voice. But you know what was most frightening? Realizing that anger had been in me for years, decades, stored up, swallowed, denied. And when I finally had the courage to look at my shadow, talk to it, ask what it wanted, do you know what it said? I just want to exist. I just want you to accept me as part of you. My anger didn't want to destroy anyone. It just wanted to be heard. My need to be cared for wasn't weakness. It was human. My sexuality wasn't a sin. It was life. My creativity wasn't a waste of time. It was my essence. That's when I started therapy. I spoke with a woman who helped me understand that all aspects of me were valid, even the ones I had learned to label as unacceptable for a woman. It was a painful process, because when you spend 40 years denying parts of yourself, reintegrating those parts is like having surgery without anesthesia. But it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I was starting to truly know myself, not the edited version I presented to the world, but the whole woman, with both light and shadow. If you're afraid of your own shadow, if you learned to be too nice, I want to tell you, your anger is sacred, your sadness is valid, your desires matter. Your need to be seen and loved isn't neurotic, it's human. Jung said, I would rather be whole than good. And now I understand what that means. Being whole means accepting all parts of yourself, even the ones society says are unacceptable in a woman. It means having the courage to be human rather than perfect. Jung called the process of becoming who you really are individuation, integrating all parts of yourself and stopping living the life others expect so you can live your own. For me, individuation began with small acts of rebellion against my old self. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do. I began expressing my opinion even when it differed from everyone else's. I began doing things just because they brought me joy, not because they were useful or productive. I started crying when I felt like crying. I started laughing out loud when something amused me. I started hugging people tightly when I wanted to show affection. And you know what happened? Some people got uncomfortable. Some said I was changing, acting weird, different. And I was. I was becoming myself for the first time in my life. Some friendships ended because they were based on my unconditional availability. Some relationships changed because I was no longer willing to be convenient. Did it hurt? A lot. But Jung said something beautiful. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And I was finally claiming that privilege. During this process, I rediscovered things I had long buried. I went back to writing. I went back to painting. I danced alone in my living room when no one was watching. I started traveling alone. The first trip was terrifying. I didn't know if I could make decisions without asking anyone else. But I found out I not only could, I loved it. I discovered I was good company for myself. I discovered I had interesting opinions about things. I discovered I was funny, creative, intelligent, when I wasn't worried about pleasing anyone. I also started doing body therapy because I realized my body had stored decades of unexpressed emotions. Every tense muscle was a no I never said. Every backache was a weight I'd carried for others. And slowly, very slowly, my body began to relax. My breathing got deeper. My posture changed. I took up more space. If you're going through this process, if you're noticing that as you get to know yourself better, some people are pulling away, don't give up. Don't backtrack. The right people for you will stay. They'll love you even more for being authentic, and you'll attract people who love you for who you are, not for what you do for them. Jung spoke of the self as our true center, our wholeness, who we really are when we stop trying to be who others want us to be. And when I started connecting with myself, magical things began to happen. I began to have clear intuitions about what was good for me and what wasn't. My body started giving me stronger signals. If something was off, I felt it in my gut. If something aligned with me, I felt a deep peace. My dreams got more vivid, more symbolic. I paid attention to synchronicities. Those coincidences, Jung said, aren't coincidences at all, but messages from the unconscious. And most beautifully, I started loving myself. Not in a narcissistic way, but in a compassionate way. I began treating myself the way I'd always treated the people I loved. I started giving myself gifts. I started praising my own achievements. I started forgiving my mistakes. I started hugging myself when I was sad. I became my own best friend. And when you become your own best friend, when you truly love yourself, something amazing happens. You stop searching in others for what only you can give yourself. You no longer need other people's approval to feel valid. You no longer need to be indispensable to feel loved. You no longer need to be perfect to feel enough. At this stage, I began to have more energy, because when you stop wasting energy pretending to be someone you're not, you have plenty left to be who you really are. I started becoming more creative. I found solutions to problems that once seemed impossible. I had ideas I never knew existed within me, and mostly, I developed more compassion for myself and for others. Because when you accept your own imperfections, it's easier to accept other people's too. When you stop judging yourself so harshly, you stop judging others as well. I won't lie to you, this process wasn't linear. It wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to go back to the woman I was before, because at least she knew her place in the world. There were days guilt ate me up inside. Am I being selfish? Am I hurting the people I love? Am I losing my femininity? Jung said, individuation is like a spiral. We don't evolve in a straight line. We move back and forth, go up and down, but each turn of the spiral takes us to a higher level of awareness. I learned to be patient with myself. I learned that real transformation takes time. I learned there's no rush to become who you are. You already are. You just need to peel away the layers that aren't really you. There were phases when I felt lost, because when you stop being who everyone expects you to be, there's a period of emptiness, of not knowing who you really are. Jung called this the dark night of the soul. But on the other side of that emptiness, on the other side, is you, the person you've always been under all the masks, all the expectations, all the roles you agreed to play. I faced a lot of resistance too, not just from outside but from within. Part of me was attached to the woman I used to be. She was familiar, safe, known. Change, even for the better, is scary because what's familiar, even if it hurts, is less scary than the unknown. But I kept going because something inside me knew there was no turning back. Once you awaken to who you really are, you can't go back to sleep. I had support from a few very special people along the way. Friends who encouraged me when I was scared. Therapists who helped me understand what was happening. Books that made me feel less alone. And there were moments of pure magic. Moments when I felt completely aligned with myself. When I knew without a shadow of doubt that I was on the right track. If you're in that phase of confusion, of not knowing who you are, take a deep breath. It's normal. It's part of the process. You're not lost. You're becoming.